She had every reason to leave. She stayed anyway. That's the whole story. Really, except it isn't. Because the reasons she stayed kept changing. And by the time she understood the last one, she was already home. She knocked twice before she heard movement inside. The cold had come down hard by the time Vera Hutchins reached the end of Canfield's Lane, the kind of January cold that got into the seams of things, the hinges of doors, the joints of fingers that had been gripping a medical bag for 3 miles of frozen road. The bag wasn't hers. It belonged to Dr. Aldrin in Harwick, who'd lent it without asking why, which was more than most people did. She had borrowed it the way she had come here at all, without quite deciding to. The neighbor's note was still in her coat pocket. 8 words. Canfield Farm. 3 children. Youngest sick. No money. She had read it 4 times that afternoon before she put on her coat. The door opened. The man standing in it was thin in the way of someone who hadn't stopped working long enough to notice. Work-roughened hands. Flower on his sleeve. Behind him, a girl of about 10 held a smaller boy back by the collar with the focused expression of someone who had been managing things for a long time. He looked at Vera. He looked at the bag. "I can't pay you," he said. "I didn't ask." She moved past him. The house was worn but not broken, a man maintaining things by will rather than resource. 1 lamp on the table, fire in the hearth burning low, and she filed that away. In the back room, she could hear a child's breathing, shallow and quick. "Where is she?" He led her without a word. The youngest was in a cot near the window, not yet 2 years old. Small as a rumor, her face flushed a deep and frightening red. Vera set the borrowed bag down and opened it. "How long has she been like this? Since this morning?" He stopped near the far wall, shoulders against the plaster. Maybe longer. She weren't right yesterday. But I thought, what's her name? Willa." Vera pressed the back of her hand to the child's forehead, then her wrist, then her neck. The fever was high, too high to guess at. "I'll need cold water and clean cloth, a lot of both." She looked up. The girl had materialized at the edge of the lamplight, watching with her father's stillness. 10 years old, maybe. Eyes that had already learned to inventory a situation, and more wood on that fire, right away. "Yes'm," the girl said, and was gone. The father hadn't moved. "I didn't ask you to come," he said quietly, not angry, just stating it, the way a man states something he feels the need to have on record. "No," Vera said. "A neighbor did. That's usually how it works." She had her hands on the child and she didn't look up again. Behind her, she heard him move to the hearth and then she heard the fire come up. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. She was already somewhere past the part of this where pleasantries lived. The girl came back with water. The boy, 7 or so, followed close behind and sat himself down on the floor near the cot without asking permission. Nobody told him to leave. Vera noted this and noted the way the father came to stand near the foot of the cot, and the particular quality of his stillness there. Not helpless, just waiting, ready for whatever came next. The note in her pocket said no money. It did not say anything about the rest of it. The fever climbed past midnight. Vera had known it would. She had seen this pattern before, the deceptive plateau in the evening hours. Then the spike. The child's small body working itself into a crisis that no amount of willpower on the part of the watching adults could prevent. You could only manage the edges of it, cool the skin, keep the airway clear, hold the line and wait. She called for water. Clem Canfield was already there with it. She hadn't heard him move. She hadn't asked. The basin was in his hands before the words were fully out of her mouth, and it was the right temperature, cold enough to matter. Not so cold it would shock. She did not comment on this. She took the basin and kept working. Delia had fallen asleep at the table near midnight, her head on her folded arms, refusing to go to bed until her father carried her. Finn had not been carried. He was still on the floor near the cot, folded in on himself with his cheek on his knee, asleep in the way of children who are determined to stay and have simply lost the argument with their own body. The house was very quiet. Clem added wood to the fire without being asked. He refilled the water basin when it warmed. He moved around the perimeter of the room the way a man moves when he has learned to be useful without being in the way. And Vera tracked his movements in the edges of her attention without meaning to. She had not expected that. Near 2 in the morning, Willa made a sound that brought Vera's hand still, not a cry. something smaller and more private, the sound of a child working very hard at something internal. Vera leaned close, watched the child's chest, counted. "She all right?" Clem asked from the corner. "She's fighting." Vera said, "That's good. That's what we want." She felt him cross the room and come to stand behind her. Not close enough to crowd, just close enough to see. He looked at his daughter the way Vera had seen men look at things they loved and could not fix that particular suspended quality. The breath held just short of praying. "She's strong," Vera said. "Stronger than she looks." He didn't answer, but something in the room shifted slightly, like a door easing on its hinge. By 3 o'clock the fever had not broken, but it had stopped climbing. Vera sat back on the stool and let herself breathe. Outside, the wind had come up, the long Montana wind that came off the mountains in January like something with a grudge. The window glass shook once in its frame. "Your neighbor's note said no money," Vera said. She wasn't looking at him. "It didn't say anything else about your situation." A pause. "That's the main part of it," he said. She nodded. She had no particular response to that. The fire crackled. Willa's breathing was steadier now, still fast, still shallow, but steadier. Finn hadn't woken. On the table, Delia slept with her mouth slightly open, one hand flat on the wood like she'd been holding something down. Vera looked at all of it, and then at the borrowed bag beside the cot, with its borrowed instruments and its borrowed authority, and she did not leave. Near 3 in the morning, the fever broke. It didn't announce itself. Willa simply went, between one breath and the next, from burning to damp, the particular cooling that followed a fever's surrender. Vera pressed her palm flat to the girl's forehead and felt it, and for a moment she simply stayed there with her hand on the child's skin and did not move. Clem, across the room, let out a breath. "She through it?" he asked. "Through the worst of it. She'll need watching tomorrow, a few days at least." He nodded. He crossed to the cot and looked at his daughter, just looked, for a long moment, and then he went to stand by the window. Outside, the dark was thinning at its edges. Not dawn yet, the hour before dawn, when the world was at its most honest. Vera began to clean up, moving quietly, repacking the borrowed bag, settling the damp cloths into the basin. Finn had not woken. Delia still slept at the table. "She left," Clem said. Vera's hands went still. "My wife." He was looking at the window, not at her. "February of last year, took what she wanted to take." He paused. "The children call it when Mama went away. I haven't told them anything different." Vera did not ask why he was telling her this. She did not ask anything. "I didn't file no report," he said. "Didn't know what to file it under." The locked door to the back bedroom, she had noticed it coming in. A door with the particular stillness of a room left exactly as someone else arranged it. She understood it now. Her hands stayed where they were, resting on the edge of the basin. She did not move toward him. She did not offer anything, but the quiet she gave him was a different kind than the quiet that had been in the room before, larger, more deliberate. "I don't generally tell folks that," he said. "I know." She didn't know why she said that, but he didn't dispute it. The gray was coming in under the door now. First light. She put on her coat, picked up the borrowed bag, and crossed to the exit. She put her hand on the latch and stopped. She turned back. "Do you have enough wood stacked to last the week?" He looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes, not surprise exactly, something quieter than surprise, and more careful. "I'll see to it," he said. She nodded. She went out into the cold. At the gate at the end of the lane, she stopped. She didn't fully understand why. She looked back at the house, the yellow rectangle of the window, the smoke going straight up in the still air, and she stood there for a moment before she made herself walk. She came back the next morning. She told herself it was professional judgment Willa's recovery could stall, a fever that high warranted monitoring. These were reasonable things, and she held them in front of herself like a lantern as she walked the 3 miles back down the frozen road. The water pail was outside his door, set beside the entrance in the specific way of something left for someone expected full. The surface barely skimmed with overnight cold, boot marks in the snow beside it. He was already gone. She stood looking at the pail for a moment before she went inside. Willa was improved, feverish still, but coherent, her small eyes tracking Vera's face with recognition. Delia had already changed the compress on her sister's forehead and reported this with the brevity of someone accustomed to giving medical updates. "Good," Vera said. "You did right." Delia looked at her with the particular expression of a child who has been competent for so long she no longer requires praise for it, only acknowledgement. Vera understood this. Clem came in from the barn at mid-morning, stamping mud from his boots. He stopped at the threshold of Willa's room, looked at his daughter, then at Vera. "Any worse in the night?" "No worse. Some better." He nodded. He went back to his work. Later, when Vera was measuring out a powder from the borrowed bag, she heard herself ask, "How much water does she generally take in a day?" It wasn't a question she needed answered. She was asking to see what he would do with it. He stopped. He came to stand beside her at the table. "Not as much as I'd like. She's stubborn about the cup. Delia gets more into her than I do." He paused. "What do you need her to have?" She told him. He looked at Delia, who was already reaching for the cup. He had deferred to Vera in front of his children without hesitation, as if her knowledge were simply true, and there was nothing to negotiate about it. She turned her attention back to the powder. Near noon. A neighbor woman passed the lane, slowed, looked at the house, and moved on without stopping. Vera saw it from the window. Clem, behind her, saw her see it. "I'm sorry for that," he said quietly. "It's not your fault." "No, but it falls on you." He looked at the floor a moment. "That ain't right." She said nothing, but she noted it the fact that his discomfort was on her behalf, not his own. That evening, Delia set the table for 4 without being asked. She had never done this before. Vera stayed for supper. The week passed in increments. Willa improved by degrees, first sitting up, then demanding Finn at her bedside, then objecting to the compress with the vigor of someone who had fully recovered and wished everyone would acknowledge it. Vera told Clem she would come back twice more. She came back 4 times. She told herself she was counting his failures. It was a reasonable precaution. She had done this before, watched a man show his best face in the early days, noted the small, consistent kindnesses, believed what she was watching was character rather than strategy. She had been very wrong, and the wrongness had cost her considerably. So she counted his failures. There were none. The water pail was full every morning she arrived. When she asked him to keep Willa's room at a specific temperature, he kept it there. When she said the child needed broth and not solid food for 2 more days, the broth appeared and the solid food did not. When Finn badgered his father about going to the creek, Clem said, "Not while Miss Hutchins is here and needing quiet more consideration than she had asked for." One evening she came in late and took the wrong door in the dark, the back bedroom, the one with the old brass latch. It swung open. She stood in the doorway of it and looked. Bare walls, a bare floor, a window with the curtains gone, against the door frame, hanging from a small nail. A dried bunch of lavender, the kind of thing a woman hangs in a room she intends to keep pleasant. Left behind. Forgotten. Maybe. Or not forgotten. She heard Clem's step in the hall behind her. "I keep thinking I ought to clear it out," he said. He stopped. "I haven't." She turned. He was standing a step back, not looking at the room, looking at a point near her shoulder. "You don't have to explain it," she said. "I know." She stepped back into the hall. She pulled the door to arrest the latch not catching, just resting. He looked at the door, then at her, and said nothing more. She went to check on Willa. The next morning, she had a memory she had not asked for Daniel Alcott, who had left hot coffee outside her door every morning for 2 months before she had believed he was a good man. She had believed it exactly long enough for him to need something from her, and then she had understood what the coffee had been for her. Her shoulders came up. She was shorter with Clem that afternoon, answering his questions and no more. He asked nothing extra. He continued doing exactly what he had been doing. She taught Delia how to monitor a patient's breathing, how to count, what to listen for, what change meant trouble. Delia absorbed this with complete seriousness. Vera, watching the girl's face, thought this child does not waste time on things that don't matter. She was aware. Somewhere below the level of thought, the teaching Delia assumed she would return. That evening, the back bedroom door was still ajar. She passed it without closing it. This was the first time she had not closed something she could have. The letter came on a Thursday. It had been forwarded from her previous address in Billings, which meant it had been traveling for some time, which meant Daniel Alcott had taken some trouble to find where she'd gone. The handwriting was his neat, confident, a hand that knew how good it looked. The contents were what she had expected: conversational, easy, a man writing to someone he assumed would be pleased to hear from him. He mentioned he was in the territory on business. He mentioned he thought of her from time to time. He did not apologize for anything. There was nothing in the letter suggesting he understood there was anything to apologize for. She read it twice, then a third time, looking for the version of herself who would answer it. The version who had made excuses for him. The version who had kept waiting for evidence to outweigh instinct. She could not find her. She was cold to Clem for 2 days. Not unkind, she kept her professional courtesies, but the extra degree of warmth she had apparently developed without noticing was absent, and she could see him notice its absence. He did not ask. He did not press. He continued being exactly what he had been, with the particular steadiness of a man who has decided simply to remain, on both mornings. The water pail was outside the door. The resource thread she had been quietly watching deepened that week. The creek-feeding Canfield's well had gone thin under the hard freeze, and rather than say anything to anyone about it, Clem had been getting up before first light and hauling water from the Bledsoe property a quarter-mile up the road. Vera found this out from Finn, who reported it with the uncalculated frankness of a 7-year-old describing his father's morning. She stood in the kitchen after Finn went back to his breakfast. She thought about the letter. She thought about a man who left coffee outside her door, and a man who hauled water in the dark so his children wouldn't go without. And she understood, not for the first time, but for the first time without arguing with it, that these were not the same man. That afternoon, she took out the letter again. She had meant to read it once more. Instead, she held it for a while, feeling the particular weight of something that had controlled her for a long time. Then she folded it once and put it in the fire. She watched it curl at the edges. Then it was gone. She did not feel different, not immediately, but she stayed for supper that evening, and she did not check whether the door to the back bedroom was closed, and she did not brace when Clem passed behind her chair. She just sat at the table with his children and let the meal be what it was. Clem discovered it watching her teach Delia. He had paused in the entrance, coming back from the barn, and had not come further in because Vera was at the kitchen table with Delia, showing her how to splint a finger using only what was in the room: a thin piece of kindling, a strip of cloth torn from an old shirt, the proper angle, the knot that held without cutting off blood. Delia was solemn and precise, her small hands following the instructions with the gravity of someone who understood that this was real knowledge and not a game. Vera did not speak down to her. She spoke across to her, the way one competent person instructs another. He stood where he was for a long time. Later, at supper, Delia mentioned without particular emphasis that she had seen Clem talking with the Bledsoe family that afternoon. She mentioned that old Cora Bledsoe had said something to her about your pa setting things straight regarding the nurse lady. She mentioned this the way she mentioned most things, as information, presented neutrally, to be used as needed. Vera went still. She looked at Clem. He was serving Finn's bowl and he did not look up. He had gone to the neighbor whose expression had been following Vera for 2 weeks. He had said whatever needed saying. He had not told her he was going to do it. He had not mentioned it afterward. She looked back at her bowl. That night, Willa woke crying at 2 a.m. Vera was up before Clem's door opened. She went to the cot. Willa's eyes were open and she was reaching not for her father, who appeared behind Vera, for Vera, her small hands opening and closing in the particular language of children who know precisely who they want. Vera picked her up. She sat with Willa in the low chair for an hour, the child against her chest, the house very quiet around them. Clem had gone back to bed. The line of light under his door went dark. She held Willa and she counted. Every morning, the water pail, every time she had asked something of him, he had done it. The deference in front of the children, the Bledsoes, the open door of the back bedroom that he had not made a performance of. Only a fact. The way he had not asked why she was cold to him and had simply kept going. Not one broken promise. She had been waiting for it the moment the kindness revealed itself as mechanism. She had been keeping careful track, certain the evidence was coming, and instead the evidence had been accumulating in the opposite direction until it was impossible to call it coincidence. This was not strategy. This was character. She sat with Willa until the child was deeply asleep. Then she sat a little longer, her hand resting on the girl's back, feeling her breathe. In the morning, Delia appeared in the doorway of Vera's room. She set something on the pillow, the dried lavender from the back bedroom doorframe, and left without a word. Vera looked at it for a long time. There was no professional reason to stay. Willa was recovered entirely, fully, eating everything placed in front of her and demanding to be carried to the window to see the horses. Vera had done what she had come to do. The borrowed bag was packed. She had been turning this fact over for 2 days like a stone in her hand. The work is finished. It is time to go. She sat on the edge of the pallet in the small room and held the bag in her lap. It wasn't her bag. She had borrowed it from a man in Harwick who had lent it without asking questions. She had carried it 3 miles down a frozen road because of 8 words on a piece of paper. She had stayed because of a fever, and then because of professional judgment, and then because of other reasons she had been careful not to name. She picked up the lavender from the pillow, held it. It had lost most of its scent by now, just the ghost of it, the memory of what it had been. Delia had taken it from an empty room and put it here. Delia, who wasted nothing and said nothing unnecessary. Vera understood what the child was saying. She stood up. She did not pick up the borrowed bag. She carried it to the front door and set it down inside the threshold, not outside, where she would have set it if she were leaving. Inside. The distinction was small, and it was everything. Then she went to find Clem. He was at the south fence, working a post that had gone loose in the freeze. He heard her coming and straightened, pulling off his gloves. He looked at her with the same expression he had been wearing for 2 weeks, steady, waiting, careful not to want anything visible. "Is she—" he started. "She's fine, fully well." Vera stopped a few feet from him. The wind was low today, on the south-facing slope. The snow had pulled back from the base of a rock and left a thin line of pale green beneath it. "I wanted to ask, is there anything left that needs doing before the ground thaws?" He looked at her. Something happened to his face that he did not try to manage. "There's always something," he said. The words came out rougher than he probably intended. She nodded once. She looked at the fence post, and then at the thin green line at the base of the rock, and then at him. He took a step toward her, slow, the way a man moves when he is not certain of his welcome and has decided to find out anyway. She did not step back. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. His fingers were cold from the work and hers were cold from the walk out, and they stood there in the January field with the pale first signs of thaw around them, and neither of them spoke. She noticed the absence of something she had been carrying for a long time. Forgiveness isn't saying what happened was okay, she thought. It's deciding it won't control your tomorrow. She had not said this aloud. She did not need to. The decision had already been made, not in this moment, but somewhere back in a week of water pails and kept promises and a lavender bunch on a pillow. The past, finally, losing its grip on a woman who had simply stopped letting it hold. The wind had gone very still. By early March, the creek was running clear. The hard freeze had broken slowly and then quickly. The way Montana winters gave way one morning, the ice at the path's edges was gone. And then the mud came, and then the smell of the earth changing beneath everything. Clem's land was beginning to wake. The south-facing slope had gone from a thin line of pale green to something real, wild prairie grass coming up. And among it, small yellow flowers that had no name Vera knew. She learned their name from Finn, who knew the names of everything within walking distance and communicated this knowledge with great seriousness. Willa had learned a new word. She had gotten it from the borrowed medical book, specifically from a page Delia had been reading aloud, because Delia read to Willa every afternoon now from whatever was available, and the borrowed medical book was available. The word was clavicle. Willa deployed it constantly and without particular accuracy, pointing at various things and announcing it with full satisfaction. "Clavicle," she told the horses. "Clavicle," she informed the yellow flowers. Vera was coming back from the well one morning, Willa on her hip, Finn at her side, giving a detailed account of where the best mud was presently located, when she heard the house door and knew without looking that it was Clem. She heard him stop. She did not turn around yet. She was looking at Finn, who had moved on to a theory about the creek, and at Willa, who was attempting to remove Vera's collar while announcing clavicle to the sky. The morning light was the color of new honey. The air smelled like cold water and something green beginning. Then she heard him come down the porch steps and cross the yard, and she turned. He was looking at her the way he had looked at her since the day she had set the borrowed bag inside his door, with the expression of a man who has been handed something he was certain he had no right to expect and has not yet fully believed it. He reached out and took Willa from her arm, and for a moment all three of them were tangled together in the way of people who have not yet sorted out the particular geography of each other. Willa grabbed his collar. Finn arrived and inserted himself between them by the simple method of walking directly into the middle of things, which was Finn's approach to most situations. Then Clem put his arm around Vera, and she leaned into him. They stood in the yard with the children around them, and the creek running, and the yellow flowers opening on the south slope, and the land stretched out before them imperfect, hard used, asking more from the people on it than most land had any right to ask, and it was theirs. And the morning was theirs. And the long winter that had brought them here was already becoming something else. Delia appeared on the porch and watched them for a moment. She had the look of someone whose private theory has just been confirmed. She went back inside without comment. Behind her, through the open door, the back bedroom caught the morning light. The new latch Clem had put on shone bright against the old wood. The room was still bare, but the door was open, and the light came through it freely. Down the hall and into the kitchen where Delia was already setting the table for 5 without being asked, the way she had been doing it for 3 weeks. Because Delia wasted nothing and said nothing unnecessary and had understood all of this long before either of them. Willa said clavicle to a passing sparrow. Finn told her that wasn't right. Vera laughed, a real one, from somewhere she had kept locked for a long time and had, without quite noticing, unlocked. Clem looked at her. She looked back. That was all. That was everything. If this story made something tighten in your chest or made you breathe a little easier at the end, that's all right. That's what it was made for. Some things don't need to be explained. They just need to be felt. This is a fiction story we created for entertainment. We hope it does something small but real for your life. Thanks for staying with us and for feeling it too.